Hello, my name is Aaron Cavanagh and I'm the founder and editor-in-chief of Post-Burnout.com. Post-Burnout.com is a culture website dedicated to venerating burnt-out artists the world over. This is our website's podcast where we publish full-length recordings of our interviews, which are sometimes the unedited versions of our site's articles and at other times are exclusives. If you're a returning listener, thank you for coming back, and if this is your first time listening, thank you for checking us out. We hope you enjoy and consider subscribing, giving the episodes a thumbs up if you're on YouTube, or giving it a rating if you're anywhere else. It really helps us out. Thank you. Alright, in this edition of PostBurnout.com interviews, Jonathan K. Horstmann, frontperson of the Austin-based dark synth-wave band Urban Heat, discusses the recently released album The Tower, his background, the rise in the band's popularity, sobriety, working at a bagel shop on the band's off time, the recent resurgence of goth music and its aesthetics, and much more. This interview was actually recorded back in May, and it's funny because we discussed the then upcoming remake of The Crow, which has since been released and, less than praised. The reason for the delay between this interview being recorded and then the album coming out last month is because next month in October the band will actually be touring Europe, so I was trying to get this interview out in between the release of the album and the European tour. So their tour begins on October 20th in Glasgow and ends on December 5th in Lisbon. In that time the band will be appearing in the UK, Netherlands, France, Germany, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Austria, Czech Republic, Switzerland, Italy, Spain, and Portugal. You can check out the band's website for dates. So it's really nice. It's really nice to talk to you, man. I'll try not to take up too much of your time. I know, you're very busy, so I'll try not to take up too much of your time. I want to talk a bit about your background to begin with. Correct me if I got any of this wrong, but my understanding is that you grew up between Florida and California, and even though you studied music as a kid, you played various instruments like violin, piano. What you were allowed to consume was actually quite restrictive, if I'm correct.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
so I wondered how that kind of uh, what was the kind of contrast there in terms of being someone who on one hand was being encouraged to pursue kind of artistic endeavors versus someone who at the same time was having um those influences kind of restricted.
Yeah, I mean, I was encouraged to because my parents were very, very religious. It was, to use your creativity to the glory of God, right?
Yep.
And everything had to be within that sort of framework, which is difficult when you're young and you're exploring creativity and exploring art because especially as a child, like creativity is just about like no limits at all,
Yeah.
and discovering everything. And so that's when I really started splitting off from my parents' idea of religion, really when it came to music, because I was able to make sounds that I was told were wrong. I was
Yeah.
like, well, then why can I do this? You know what I mean? Like I'm discovering things that, yeah.
So, do you mean like when you say why am I allowed to do this? You mean more so just saying if this was kind of like if this was not in God's plan, let's say, I wouldn't have the capability of doing this.
Kind of, yeah. It's like it's okay, so imagine that you're just I don't know. I'm imagining like a color palette, right? And
Hmm.
you're painting and you're learning how to mix colors, right? You're using primary colors to make secondary and tertiary and you're doing all this and then somebody comes over your shoulder, looks at your work and they're like, "Oh God. Oh no, you used forest green. No, that's the forbidden color." And you're like, "Well, all I did was mix, you know what I mean?" And they're
Yeah.
like, "No, anything but forest green."
Yeah.
And it was like, well, that seems so arbitrary. And they're like, well, the forest green is the devil's color. The devil
Yeah.
uses forest green to bring people into his. So if you look at it, when you can kind of use color as the metaphor there, it becomes very clear that like music is just music. It's all just different. It's just a different color palette.
How old were you when you kind of got to I guess start experiencing some of this kind of heathens music?
I think I was 15. I was
Okay.
15 and a kid transferred into our school I was at like a private Christian academy, and this kid came in who listened to like Against All Authority and Total Chaos, and just exposed me to this stuff that like made no sense to me mentally, but like my heart and my
Yeah.
body, it made perfect sense as like an angsty teenager. And like I didn't have a lot of friends in school, and like I didn't have a sense of fashion. And then here came all of this. It was just like, oh my gosh, like Dickies and jumpsuits and Doc Martens and Mohawks. And like there's there's a uniform for like outcasts like me, you
Yeah.
know? Um,
That's cool. Like, so you really just went like straight for like it wasn't you weren't acclimatized, gradually. It was just like, no, here it is in like
yeah,
about as hardcore as music could get.
yeah, it just made sense. And we would on Friday nights, Dustin's mom would get us like pizza and stuff, and like three or four of us would just go into their garage, and we didn't have like a system. There was like a karaoke machine. And
Mhm.
so we would just play music as loud as we could on the karaoke machine and just beat the shit out of each other. We would just the four of us would just be moshing, and it was great because it kept us out of so much trouble.
Yeah.
There was so much worse things we could be doing, and we were just like in there. And that's when, because I discovered like Christian punk, and I would start going to these Christian hardcore shows. And I went to my youth pastor, and I was so psyched. I was like, look, I discovered this thing, it's like so
Yeah.
incredible. And like all these kids are like learning about God and Jesus. And he was just like, no, that's the devil's music. Like
Yeah.
there's no such thing as Christian rock. It's either Christian or it's rock. And
Yeah.
I was done at that point.
No, actually, that's an interesting kind of perspective because, like, you have like, I don't know, like people kind of like of the same faith, kind of having kind of differences, not necessarily on the theological, or religious. Like, it's not on that level. It's just more so like what is actually appropriate in terms of like, how we live our lives in the kind of in the material world. It's very interesting, kind of perspective. And do you find that like, and because of these sort of contradictions, that aided you then in sort of being able to, or I could just be reaching here, so call me out if I'm talking shit, but did you find
No,
that like observing these kind of contradictions amongst people of the same faith kind of was enabled you to kind of be able to think more independently?
absolutely. Absolutely. So I think that um as you kind of see that everyone at the end of the day is trying to do what feels right to them, what
Hmm.
resonates with them, then you kind of have to look at, okay, like what resonates for me,
Yeah.
you know?
So once you kind of like once you got out of high school, um what did you do then? I mean, in terms of like did you pursue music, or did you kind of like, because I know for if I am correct again, just from my understanding of your background, there was a time where you were kind of like uncertain of what you were doing in life, and you kind of like wandered and were quite aimless in terms of your approach to what you were going to do as an adult. I was wondering, like after high school, what was the kind of immediate approach?
Yeah, so there was definitely music. Music was a means to get all the things that were restricted to me in a strict household. So girls, drugs, and alcohol.
Mm,
And music was a vehicle for me to do that. So I just went as hard as I could. And really, like, I didn't think I was living mindlessly. I thought I was living a very artistic, creative life, and I was living my life itself as art.
mhm.
Um, just kind of bucking against the system in any way that I could. I was an anarchist and lived in punk squats, and I just wanted no part of the rest of this.
Yeah.
I saw it as completely hopeless. And then therefore myself, and I all of my idols at that point were all people who, were part of the 27 club, who had
Yeah.
died young. And that was my plan, was to just make as much art as I could and burn out fast.
Obviously, you've had history of addiction. I don't actually talk too much about that because it's something that I feel, you've documented a lot in interviews. I have a bit of a different approach to this. And again, if you think I'm full of shit, call me out on it. But I was wondering because you were mentioning there the 27 Club, and you think of people like, Kurt Cobain, Jim Morrison, and later Amy Winehouse, and a lot of these figures who pass away at 27. I was wondering, do you find that the kind of aesthetics of cool of what being cool is, because it's something I've thought about independently. Do you think it's often kind of married with a lot of the images of addiction? Because I think of like some of the images of cool of being kind of aloof, of being kind of I don't know, detached from the situation, of being kind of I don't know, just above it all. But I find a lot of ways it actually kind of mirrors the image of like a heroin addict, of the kind of the just physical and mental exhaustion that comes from that addiction. I was wondering, do you ever find that at some degree, like, our image of what is cool is actually based on people who are suffering and people who are addicts?
I think a lot of it, I mean, we have the term heroin chic.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that's fully a term. And um, I think that that's shifting a bit though, because of the sort of like the health lifestyle culture that's become very popular, which is a double-headed sword, or double-sided,
Double-edged
double,
sword, yeah.
yeah, or a double-headed dragon. Because you know, a lot of, I think, social media and the way that we're connected is really beautiful, but a lot of it depends upon making people feel less than and that they need something else because everybody's just trying to market something to you. And I say it's double edged because the health industry sort of, I think it leaves a lot of people feeling like they're on the outside of that and that they're not good enough.
Mhm.
And it's just, it sucks that we have to prey on people's like worst insecurities in order to make a buck, in order to make a living.
Yeah.
But that's also sort of, that's late stage capitalism, that's where we are.
Yeah. Actually, it's I think like you actually see kind of detrimental aspect of what you're talking about of the health industry. I think recently where, you see the explosion in the Ozempic market, which is like medication meant to treat people who have an actual life-threatening disease like diabetes. And, people just out of kind of vanity are using it and are actually taking the resources from people who actually need it. I think that's the kind of toxic element of the kind of health kick that we're kind of currently living in. I don't know if you have any opinion on
Yeah,
that.
states are actually considering it's going state by state, but they're going to allow insurance to cover Ozempic,
Yeah.
um, which I think is good for people who need it. Yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know if I can comment on that.
No, that's fair. No, it's just no, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah. So going back to your career then, so as we were kind of mentioning, you had this idea of like, I'm gonna burn out quickly, so I'm just gonna like, create as much art as I can in that time. Do you find that the art you were creating in your kind of younger days was creatively fulfilling, or was it just trying to get a quantity so that you would have kind of a history of I don't know, releases? Or because I do think a lot of times, a lot of the reason people kind of create art is just to kind of have something to for people to have something to remember them by when they're gone.
yeah. Well, I think one thing, creatively, we kind of have to always be just putting things out, even if it's shit,
Yeah.
because we're practicing. We have
Hmm.
to put out like 1,000 really bad things before, or at least create 1,000 bad things before we really start honing our craft. And with songwriting, when you're trying to, lyrically to actually say something, if you think about what the average 20-year-old has to say, it's real
Right.
shit.
Hmm.
And um, I still don't think I've really written a good song. You know what I
Okay.
mean? Like it just, I wasn't capable of creating anything in my opinion, I wasn't capable of creating anything really of value until I had gone through a lot of shit, you
Hmm.
know? And I think maybe that was part of, in subconsciously, that's part of why I was living the way that I was, because I was creating pain and tragedy so that I had something more so that I had something to feel in the moment. But looking back at it now, I have a lot to pull from when it comes time to actually write. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I love the idea, the story of like Picasso and like how old he was when he started painting, you know. And I
Yeah.
think that we're starting to, the way that we and maybe this is just my perspective, but I think that the way that we celebrated youth in the past is kind of maybe gotten boring, and maybe
Hmm.
we've recognized that like, oh, people in their 30s, 40s, 50s actually have good shit to say, have perspectives, and like
Yeah.
maybe we should be consuming art and ideas provided by people with some experience, as well as, I mean, there's definitely something for just like raw talent and just like throw it at the wall and like let's just go. Like there's nothing like watching a band in their early 20s like really going for it, who are rehearsing their instruments and just really tight, and there's and you know they have the whole world in front of them. That's really
Yeah.
exciting. But there's also something to someone who's spent decades honing their craft and is like just now starting to like see those wheels start turning and starting to be able to reap some of those plants that they've been sowing and taking care of for so long. I think I'm talking about myself. But
Do you actually this is an important kind of distinction I think to make, because like I think as you mentioned, like when people kind of when musicians kind of get more seasoned and they kind of grow, they can kind of either go one of two ways. They can get kind of complacent and just play the hits and just play the songs people want to know, or they can continue and try and create new stuff, and try to actually expand their repertoire and expand their discography or their body of work. But what I find kind of soul crushing, I don't know what your opinion this is, but I find it really soul crushing when artists are trying to expand and are in their 50s and their 60s and beyond, and are trying to make new music and trying to create new art, and people just don't even bother with it. It's like we just want to hear the hits. It seems like people are kind of it's very like, I don't know, very sad, I think, when someone is still kind of pouring their heart out and trying to bring their life experience in it, and people just like, no, tell me what you thought when you were 17 or something.
right, yeah, yeah. I think that something, a trap that more established artists can fall into when trying to reinvent themselves. I think that it has to come, people can smell insincerity from like a
Yeah.
mile away. So one, it has to come from just like a really natural progression, um, and not kind of forcing it. But then two, I think that when you've had people like music that's relatable, right? The longer your career as a successful artist is, the less relatable your day-to-day life becomes to everyone else, and the less that you're even able to relate to other people. And so I think if you're writing from that place, it might be really difficult. I think maybe you have to just like, this is what I want to hope to do. I want to hope to maintain like some element of like youthful wonder, and just, I still feel like a kid in a lot of ways, and I hope that small part of me remains, because I think that'll keep my writing good, you
Mhm.
know. um I think we also like, our tastes change, and as artists we want to write something that we enjoy, you know.
Mhm.
And um there's a balance between writing for your fan base and writing for yourself, and I think you just have to keep writing that line, you know. And I think maybe as get longer, writing that line becomes a little harder. So this break that we're on right now from touring, we're home for 3 months, we're about
Mhm.
halfway through it, and this is the longest I've been off tour since we started touring. So much so that I picked up a job working at a bagel shop on the
Okay.
weekends.
Yeah.
Right, my first day at this bagel shop, I was in there for like 4 hours, and I was like, okay, I'm done. And I like look at the clock, and I'm like, I I have to stay for another 4 hours. And it was the first time in a while that like I was just, I had a moment of being like, Jesus, everyone, most people, like 5 days a week, they like want to leave and they can't.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm just like spending time in the van, resting. Like I work hard, but like, but it's so different. And I'm actually like really, really thankful because I'm working the counter, I'm talking to people, and I'm like, I feel like it's a really good moment to just jump back into what not being a musician is like. Because even just the last year of touring, I was starting to become to not separate myself, but just my experience is so there's few people that my experience is relatable to. And as we become more successful, the pool of people with similar experiences get smaller and smaller. And the effect that that has had on me was negated a little bit by being able to jump back into just like an hourly job for a couple days a week. um, so maybe the legacy artists just need to like pick up a job at a coffee shop real quick and write, you know what I mean, and like write about that shit.
Yeah. That'd be cool seeing like Mick Jagger behind a bar or something. That'd
Yeah, yeah,
be
it'd be
but
amazing.
but like that's a really kind of like I think a very interesting perspective too in terms of like trying to actually stay grounded. But I think like that's something that obviously I think comes with maturity of being kind of like, well, obviously as someone who's been doing music as long as you have, I mean, like you have to kind of uh yeah, kind of step back and kind of go, okay, what's the average person's perception? I actually think about this with comedians a lot because you get comedians who get like really successful and like, well, how do they maintain their jokes as new material comes on if the average listener is like how they kind of relate their life experiences as like multi-million dollar movie stars to like the
Right.
average
And I
person.
think I think that's why degrading your spouse is so like
Yeah,
easy, because everyone who has a marriage has issues. And
yeah.
that's why jokes around people's kids, because like people raise kids and they know that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's actually a really good point. Yeah, I mean, I never even really thought about that, but like, yeah, that's probably why, like a lot of those kind of hacky jokes happen just because like, well, what else do I have? Car
Yeah.
issues.
Yeah, you got dating, love life, children. Like
Yeah. Um,
your relationship with your parents, but it's like all like family, because like everyone has families.
do you find that that is something that you're going to be conscious of then? Like if the when the band is obviously very successful and when the kind of with the growth and with the kind of continual growth of it that to try and have that one foot in reality, I guess. And is that something that's always going to be like conscious to you to try and like step back and kind of do things that are more, I guess, normal, quote unquote?
There's definitely a part of me that just feels kind of like an alien and just wants to be able to be an alien,
Mm.
and just
Hmm.
like have my existence just be so different, but it's mine and it's fine because I'm surrounded by people who are aliens too. I think until I can find my tribe of aliens, I think it's really important that, yeah, that I do stay grounded and stuff. And I think by just like being empathetic and caring what the fuck's going on in the world, I think that'll keep you sort of grounded, because you're going to want to do things as I'm able to have a larger, like, positive impact in the world. I think that, yeah, I think that's gonna help keep me like in it.
I know, like another aspect to kind of the other project you had before was the ability to walk away. I forget the name of the project offhand. I apologize, but you mentioned you were in another project where you were singing about kind of a lot of the societal issues that are affecting Black Americans, and you kind of got just really tired of performing this to white audiences who were just kind of like nodding along, and it felt like it wasn't as impactful for you as it should be. You were able to walk away from that project once you were kind of dissatisfied with it. Do you feel now that Urban Heat is kind of becoming so big and becoming such like an important fixture of your life, do you find that if the day ever came where you had to walk away for whatever reason, you'd be able to do that, or do you find like you kind of that option becomes less viable the more popular it becomes?
I I think there's no way to tell. There's no way to tell. Use this as an example. So my wife and I separated recently. Started like the beginning of this year. Basically, the separation started, and in in December, if you'd asked me in December if I could imagine existing outside of my marriage, I would be like, absolutely not. This is going to last absolutely forever. And then in January, between January and April, I at times it did feel like my life was over. Like how could this be happening? And you adapt and you find the lessons and blessings that are there, and if I ever walk away from urban heat, it'll be because it's the right thing to do for me. I can't picture it right now being the right thing to do. Um, but yeah, there's no telling. There's no telling. I would love nothing more from where I'm sitting right now. I would love nothing more than Urban Heat to be, you know, a legacy act that's playing, taking the place of Susie at Cruel World,
Yeah.
um, and having bands in 30 years citing us as like the reason that they, you know what I mean? But
Hmm.
at the same time, if Urban Heat is just sort of we're on a very steep upward trajectory right now. We have a lot of momentum. We're just kind of we feel like we lit a rocket and we're just holding on to it.
Hmm.
Um, a lot of times when that happens, there can be some sort of flaming out, or we get to some point, or we burn out, or we're being very careful to do what we need to make sure that this is sustainable for us. But on one hand, Urban Heat could be a legacy thing. On the other, it could be just this moment in time that happened, and we all get to do other amazing things after the fallout from it.
Yeah, because Urban Heat obviously was born from, you guys getting together, having known each other from previous acts, and did you guys even like really expect it to kind of become as big as it is? Because like, have you ever became like a huge hit on TikTok? Obviously, you mentioned before that TikTok wasn't something that you were like totally invested in or totally knowledgeable of. It was just something that you kind of threw up on TikTok, and just exploded. It became this big thing. In a lot of ways, you find how much kind of dictation over your own success do you think you have? Because something like that is just so arbitrary and just like what were like really big, and like how do you find kind of like traversing that?
Yeah. I believe in like the power of manifestation. I believe in hard work and talent and getting a little lucky, a
Mhm.
lot lucky. Um, I would love to say that, um, oh wow, this is such a pleasant surprise, but I've been planning on this my entire life. I didn't know how it was going to look when I was younger. I thought it was going to happen faster when I was younger, for
Mhm.
sure. But um, I do feel like I was built for this, and this is my purpose on this earth. And um, there's definitely, I am surprised, but I'm also, um, it's sort of like if you always wanted to go to space, when you grew up, you want to be an astronaut. Like on the day that you're finally like on a rocket and you're on your way, yeah, like your eyes are you're blown away that this is actually your life and like this is happening.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you did take every step that you needed to in order to get to that point, you know. And I don't think that we're in space yet by any means. But I do think that we are putting jet fuel. We have our
Yeah.
gas can and we're putting it in. We're putting it in and we're trying to find all the jet fuel, and we're like finding everybody else who has jet fuel, and we're like, come on, let's go. And we're like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Yeah.
Um, one final thing, I try not to take up too much of your time. I know you've been very gracious. I want to ask actually because you briefly mentioned there, Cruel World, the festival. I was wondering, do you find that kind of like vindicating the fact that a festival like that can be so big and draw so many people to be kind of vindicating for the style of music that you want to do? Because like the kind of music that you were doing isn't, sorry, with Urban Heat. I mean, it's kind of a revival of dark wave, and a lot of comparisons get drawn to the Cure and stuff, but I think it's very much like a very standalone thing. I don't think obviously you have to kind of have reference points for people to get to kind of entice people to listen, but generally it's never going to be one for one parallel. And yeah, so I was wondering, do you find the fact that post-punk now, gothic music now, like even a lot of synthesizing music now is becoming so popular and is still resonating kind of with younger generations to be sort of vindicating for what it is that you wanted to do?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, and when you talk to the promoters too, you can tell like they know that there's a wave. Hey, pardon the pun, but there's like
I didn't
there's
even pick up on
definitely, yeah,
that.
there's this like wave kind of coming, and it's, as goth culture becomes more of a part of the like public zeitgeist, with even with shows like Wednesday,
Mhm.
the Addams Family Story, and things like that, and then like the reboot of The Crow, although
Oh
we'll
yeah.
see how they do. But
The original soundtrack to the first Crow is amazing, by the way. Hopefully
yeah,
they'll do something like that.
which is one of the things that people are kind of commenting on, that it doesn't seem like the music it really fits. They could have done better with that, but we haven't seen it yet, so I'm holding judgment until I go to the theater, because I'm
Mhm.
definitely seeing it in theaters. um I think that it is a step in the right direction. I think the problem, well, it's not a problem, but it's telling that the all of the anchor artists for those festivals have to be legacy acts, right?
Mhm.
Excuse me. There is no modern there are no modern acts playing like once the sun's gone down, almost like it's
Mhm.
all legacy acts. And that's where we need to get to. We need to get to the point where like Molchat Dama can be big enough to like anchor a festival like that, and there's enough large modern bands that can do that. Like, of course I want the legacy acts to like stick around as long as they possibly can, but we also have the like human element of time where the legacy acts might not be playing in 20 years. And
Yeah.
so um it's a step in the right direction. It's really telling. I wish there were more major ones. I mean, right now we have Cruel World and Darker Waves, but they also like just started. And there's also been these like, there's like Terminus, there's Cold Waves, there's these genre-based festivals that have been doing this for decades, right? Which are just getting bigger. Um, so yeah, it's a really, really exciting time to be a quote unquote dark wave band. I really appreciate how you had said that there have to be points of reference, but it's kind of standalone, because I think that's also how you can become a legacy act in the future, is sort of like you kind of have to carve your own path sonically.
Yeah, no, and absolutely. I mean, uh, I think like you were saying, like the kind of appetite for kind of gothic music. I think actually, in a lot of ways, I mean, like I think in some ways, like subcultures are kind of are sort of dying out, and everyone's just kind of getting a bit of a blend of everything, which I think is really nice. Like you can go to like a lot of festivals, and it seems like um people are kind of just like engaging with everything. Like I think the sort of genre specific festivals are kind of having to reluctantly or openly, expand and kind of be more accommodating to other styles of music, which I think is great. I think in a lot of ways, it's kind of based on, like people having the whole history of recorded music at their fingertips, you know. It's like it's great,
Absolutely.
you know. I was wondering
Yeah.
like now, because as we are mentioned, like you're kind of like how limited your scope was as a kid. Do you often find now as an adult that you're playing catch up for those lost years, or are you kind of content with what you know now, as sort of going like, no, this is like I've had my education.
Okay, I'm trying to play catch up, but there's so much new music too.
Yeah.
I hear every day. Most of the music that I hear is stuff that I've never heard before.
Hmm.
You know, like every day I'm just looking on spot. Okay, who's this? Like make a note. Okay, who's
Yeah.
this? Make a note. So I'm just constantly, yes, trying to catch up, but also like being influenced by stuff that the other stuff that's happening and yeah, it is. So Kevin in the band, he's like, I mean, Kevin and Pax both, they are like musical encyclopedias. Um, so when it comes time for like interviews where people want to like talk about like, even though I write the music, when people want to talk about influences and stuff, like bring the guys along because like I'm I got nothing.
But that's cool, like, cause you kind of come at it from the perspective of, I guess, to whatever extent someone can be, kind of like the perspective of a blank slate of being like, no, I'm just gonna forge what I think is right. Do you often get people, um, uh, referencing music like, hey, that like, sounds like X or Y or Z, and it's like I've never actually listened to them.
I smile and nod and I make a mental note that I have to like to you know what I mean? Oh, I throw it in my Spotify playlist really quickly.
That's cool, man. I don't want to take up too much more of your time. And again, thank you for this. I've really enjoyed talking with you. I want to ask two final things. One is about obviously you've been in Austin, Texas for a while. Recently Austin has kind of been. I mean, it's always been kind of I think the cultural, artistic heart of Texas. My understanding of it is from what I've heard from like other people, it's very much divorced from kind of mainstream. Idea of what Texas is, like places like Dallas or Houston or San Antonio or any of the other big Texan cities. Austin is very much its own. It's almost like a kind of wet a coastal city in the middle of Texas, is what I've heard.
Mm.
This is my personal opinion. I was wondering, like now recently, like over the last couple of years, I mean, Texas is sorry, Austin has been, gaining a lot of people from across the country, coming. Some people coming for artistic reasons, other people coming for more corporate reasons. I was wondering, how do you find Texas has changed in even just like the brief period that this band has existed?
Yeah, there's a little anecdote that I like to give. There was a an affordable music rehearsal and recording studio in South Austin called Music Lab. They had like 40 rooms. It was like really cheap to like get in. They had lockout rooms. It was awesome. That was demolished for a Tesla showroom.
Jesus. Yeah.
That that's kind of yeah, it I don't know, man. It comes with I feel like it's what happens everywhere. You know, you
Mhm.
have a place is cool and affordable, and so artists like flock there because it's affordable and they make something out of it. But they also make it cool, and so when people are looking for cool places to, I think it's also like part of like startup culture because you want to like bring your company somewhere that's like cool, you know. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's changed in the time since this band has started. I mean, this band started when I was starting a family, and then I was just really invested in the band as well. Between those things, I feel like I was just so focused on what I was doing that the world kind of changed and moved all around me, and I was just here.
Yeah.
Um, so it's kind of hard for me to comment on you know the changing landscape of Austin. I will say that the people who are here and are still making art are doing a really incredible job at it, you know. And there's a lot of really incredible artists here, musically or otherwise, and I hope that remains. Um, but I've been on the roads so much that places just kind of start blurring, and the idea of home really becomes about the people that you're around. Um, so yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like as you mentioned, you have like, your family now. It's like, in some ways, I mean, do you find that kind of gives you a sense of security in the sense of, as we're talking about issues like say gentrification and, kind of people being culled out of the art scenes that, you can kind of live kind of as a vagabond and kind of like move around and be kind of free as long as you have the central people that in your life that are important to you.
Well, that's an interesting thought because especially, I mean, the separation was kind of finalized in the last month, maybe like 6 weeks. And that was something that I've been struggling with, the idea of, who I have around me, and what's permanent and what's not. And um, yeah, I mean, my girls are everything, and where they are is home. Luckily, right now, that's in Austin. And then if that ever changes, then home will change for me too. Um, I'm kind of at this place for the first time in 8 years where I'm getting to decide, who I want to be alone, just as a man, like what kind of man I want to be. And um, being off the road for so long has given me probably too much time by myself to think about that. Um, but my personal goal right now is just to practice being better at being alone. And so this break from touring is probably a real blessing, and probably came just at the perfect time. Um, yeah.
I mean, obviously you've done, over your life you've done a lot of like uh kind of self-building. You've obviously got yourself out of like some really really like spots that I can't even like really imagine like being in. Obviously you're a lot stronger now, you're a lot more mature, you're a lot more self-taught, you're a lot more educated is what I'm trying to say. Do you find now like you can kind of like face like these tough moments in your life and sort of know that you have the strength not to kind of go back to vices or distractions? And also, I mean, I don't know if this is too heavy a question, you can just ignore it, but do you often worry if that the band could become a distraction from I don't know, personal woes? Like if you're kind of like, okay, I'm just gonna focus on the band and focus on this tour, and I'll deal with my issues after this tour, or I'll deal with it after this recording session. Do you ever worry that it might eventuate into that?
I hadn't thought about it like that, that I could be using this creative venture as a way to avoid doing deeper work. Shit.
Oh shit, I'm sorry.
Well, okay. I feel like a lot of that deeper work does happen and can happen through touring,
Yeah.
because I'm never working on myself more really than when when on the road. Because you have a lot of like insert time. You have um on this last tour, I had to start kind of transitioning from going right to the merch table after performances to sort of spending more time away from the crowd, because of the energy. And then I had a couple of strange fan interactions that made me feel a little unsafe. And I was just like, okay, this is shifting now. Okay, we're going to spend more time in the green room, more. Um, and so I think that might be the case. I could be avoiding things if I was always surrounding myself with the fans, and then like inviting people to the after party, and like going and doing all of this and just like burning the candle, even if I wasn't drinking, just like always like having somebody singing my praises to me, and then going to the next city, and just being a terror. But that's not necessarily the case. And I think by working on trying to be the best version of myself when I have no stability, I have like not the sense of home, like I'm uprooted and traveling, I think that in a lot of ways it's harder to work on yourself than like the work is harder. But there is a kind of work that I need to be doing when I'm home too. Um, like what I was saying about like getting good at being alone and things like that. Because it's interesting, like even the times when I've been alone since this break, I've been filling it with I've been working on music. I'm, you know, um, I need to meditate. I don't meditate every morning. I write a song every morning. And I'm like, you know, but I feel I don't know. I think honing your craft and maybe shit, Aaron, maybe I'm putting off.
Sorry.
Oh, it's okay. I gotta call my therapist. Thanks.
Yeah. This is the most expensive interview ever. I'm sorry.
Oh my gosh, no.
No, I've actually really appreciated like when I've heard you talk about it, and it was very interesting to listen to, talking about kind of the day to day, as someone who's sober, and I'm sober too. I'm teetotal, 2 years next month. So yeah,
Yeah, good
and
on you, man. Good on you.
thanks. And it's difficult at first, like, because I used alcohol as I wasn't on any hard drugs, thankfully, but I was using alcohol as a means of social lubrication, is what I say. It was like an aid for that. And you were kind of talking about like when you're on the road, like people are paid in bar chips, and it's like you're paid in drinks, and something you said that I thought was really interesting. What you were saying, like essentially bands and live performers are advertisers for alcohol. You're advertising the bar. You're advertising, that's the reason the venue is hosting you, is to get people to buy drinks. And it's like, oh my God, I've never even like really thought of the perspective like that. Do you often, yeah, I mean, I was just gonna say, like, I think it's really great and noble how, you're able to live this lifestyle, maintain sobriety, and just do what you're doing because you enjoy what you're doing, and you're able to not be tempted, I guess. I think it's really great. I just want to
Yeah.
say it.
Thanks, man. Thanks. Yeah, it's really interesting, when I started talking about my sobriety, how many of our, fan base, how much of our fan base was like, yeah, me too. Or, like just the number of people who feel like they're struggling with alcohol was really, really sobering, pardon the
Yeah.
pun.
That one I got.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so that's why we started like a little Discord like support group for people, for our fans who are either sober curious or have been sober and just want to like some sort of community around that.
Yeah.
um and I want to do more in the future as I'm able, but uh yeah, I think that's just one. Alcohol is like an easy sort of vice to sort of pinpoint and remove. There's
Mm.
other things that become, a lot trickier. Um, so why not focus on the easy one first, and then,
Yeah. Dude, I'll tell you a quick story. I try not to take up too much of your time, but when I quit alcohol the last time, I tried doing it twice before, and I would last for a couple of months, and then inevitably I'd end up going back because, again, at a party or at like a gig or something. But dude, the first, like when I finally kicked it last time, I was like, going, okay, I'm gonna take it real serious. I'm gonna go to AA. I'm gonna do AA. And I went to there was like actually not too far from me, within walking distance, there was like a local AA branch, and I was going to go to it, and I was looking at them like trying to see which is the right place. It's just like really awkward because you don't want to like accidentally knock on the wrong door or something.
yeah,
And I
yeah,
saw this like group of people, and they all seemed to like. I was like, oh, that must be the place. And they all seemed to like know each other and stuff. So I was like, I feel too awkward, so I just like left and never went. So I think it's like
yeah,
cool that like you're kind of offering these services to people because again, I think a lot of times social awkwardness and neurodivergence and a lot of these aspects can lead to issues like addiction. Um, but it can also I think some of these things can also like shyness or like anxiety or like anything like this can also prevent people from getting the help they need too, and that's beyond their control. That's just how they're wired, for lack of a better term. So I do think it's important to kind of like talk about these things in relation to things like ADHD, anxiety disorders, and whatever else, autism or any of these other things on the spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it kind of comes back to this, like, what we're inundated with, this idea, this, I think a lot of our self-esteem issues come from this untenable idea of perfection that sold us. And
Mhm.
um, I think that if I have the opportunity to affect people's lives through our music and through our social media presence and stuff, then like it should be in a way that you know helps people feel good at the end of the day, even if it's depressing music. This
Yeah.
helps people feel seen. And um, that's what our community does for me. I feel very seen. um, and so I hope that our music and our shows and stuff can do the same.
Perfect, man. I guess final thing I'll just do. It's a bit awkward just to transition this now, but just to plug the album.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
it's called The Tower. It's out. I have August 16th. Is that correct?
Yes,
Perfect.
yes.
And yeah, the new song from it is Seven Safe Places. I was wondering what can kind of people expect from the record, and how do you find that this one differs from your previous album?
Okay, so it's different because the previous one was I was kind of trying to speak externally, trying to like give, we called it wellness, and it was kind of like uh, I've said that it was like the first album was like therapy for everybody else, whereas this one's like therapy for me.
Mhm.
The songs get like much more personal, and it's more about the things that I worry about, like imposter syndrome and a fear of like fucking all of this up. Um, and then sonically, we we got really bold with the influences that we bring into it. um there's some post rock, there's obviously like the like dark wave, synth wave, and some post punk, but it's heavy, it gets heavier and darker, significantly so. um but at the same time, yeah, I don't know. I think it's just a progression. It's just a progression of this band, a progression of the art, and it's the first thing that I've ever written as a complete body of work. It's from the start to the finish. It's all meant to be in that order and all together, and um, it's a complete thought, and it should be consumed that way. I know that we listen to singles, we listen to the songs, and I know people are going to find songs that they like, and those are the ones that they're going to, focus on. But if somebody wants to ingest it the way that it was prepared, then it would be, let me do this thing start to finish. Because if you hop around, you can be like, what, why
Yeah.
they went there. But there's palate cleansers, and there's moments. And yeah, I'm hyped on it, super super hyped.
So that's something you tease with the live set list where you kind of like try and figure things out live in terms of like, okay, how's this like using, I guess, like audience reaction as a means of kind of testing the waters, because you can kind of go, how does this song flow into this one based on how the audience are kind of reacting? Or do you kind of test out stuff live like that, or how does that dynamic work?
A lot of it, honestly, we put together our set list based on how we feel about it, um, how it flows for us energetically. I think in the beginning we thought about, you know, how the presentation is going to be, but I think we've been playing live long enough that we're kind of tuned into how that audience is going to be. And like honestly, a crowd, and especially if you're like, so our next tour is like a headline tour, right? So like those are going to be like our people there, and if they're warm and they're excited and they're ready, it, my job is to kind of, it isn't just to like give them what they want, but is more to sort of bring them along, and sort of I can I can bend them to my will. So if it's like, now's the quiet time, like we can make that happen, and then like, now I'm going to surprise you with something. And it's about making it like a really exciting, but also like it does feel natural, it feels natural, but there are moments that I want to be sort of jarring.
Perfect, man. Thanks very much for your time. I've really appreciated this conversation. I've really enjoyed it. Is there anything you'd like to add before we wrap up?
Just one thing. There was something that I said earlier. This is it's a small thing, but it it weighed on me. It was just a throwaway comment too. We were talking about comedy and we were talking about families and like family humor. And I said, because everybody has families. And as soon as I said that, I recognized that like not everyone does, and not everyone listening to this interview or watching this interview, that is their experience. And I just wanted to acknowledge that and just not minimize the experience of anybody who who that statement from me might have felt like they weren't being seen.
No, that's very like I think that's a very important thing to acknowledge, and again, it shows I think um a kind of acknowledgement of life experiences beyond one's own, which I think is very important for everyone to be kind of cognizant of. Um, Thank you very much for your time, Jonathan, and I've really enjoyed this, and I hope it hasn't been too boring for you.
No, this is great. Thanks so much.
Thanks, man. Enjoy the rest of your day, and take care of yourself.
All right, you do the same, Aaron.
Best of luck. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to that episode of Post-Burnout.com interviews. We're an independent venture run by yours truly, and as I said at the beginning, liking, rating, subscribing, and sharing really helps us out a lot. If you're feeling extra generous, we do have a PayPal donation link in the episode description, but don't feel obligated, of course. We've also begun releasing occasional exclusive episodes on Spotify, so subscribe there if you'd be interested in hearing those. Thanks again for listening, and see you next time.